Good morning and good afternoon to our audience, which I see includes friends and colleagues, as well as current and future partners from various countries in Europe, Asia, and the Pacific. On behalf of the ADB's European Representative Office in Frankfurt and Education Finland in Helsinki, I warmly welcome you to today's event. Today's webinar is the first in a series of events that ADB has planned with Education Finland and the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Our goal is to link Finnish education expertise with ADB and vice versa. And most importantly, to find and create mutually beneficial education outcomes in Asia and the Pacific region. I'm very excited to introduce you to a panel of great experts who have joined us today. But before I do, let me extend a heartfelt thank you to ADB's alternate executive director, Ms. Leena Viljanen, for having made this possible. She early on identified the great work that is done in ADB's education sector and the possible synergies with the many expertise that is available in this sector in Finland, and had the vision to establish a close partnership between Education Finland and ADB. Unfortunately, Ms. Viljanen wasn't able to join today. However, I wanted to have shared with you a bit of the history of how we've been strengthening our partnership with Finland. I hope you will also be able to attend future sessions that we have planned for this year, and we hope they will be face-to-face. Let me now quickly introduce the great team of speakers who are joining us today. We are very excited to welcome His Excellency Juha Pikku, Ambassador of Finland to the Philippines, who will formally open today's session. Followed by Ambassador Pikku, we will learn about ADB's partnership with Finland in the education sector from Mr. Brajesh Pant, the ADB's Chief of Education Sector Group. In between, we will have a short surprise for you, and I hope you will look forward to that. We will then be hearing from Mr. Jouni Kangasniemi, Program Director of Education Finland and co-host of this event. What I think will make today's event even more unique is that we will hear from Kimo Koivisto, CEO of a startup tech company called Digizen, which provides digital identification to people who do not yet have any ID. And this company currently works in Papua New Guinea under an ADB finance project. You might wonder what the relation is to the education sector, so please stay tuned to find out. These presentations will be followed by a Q&A session. And for those of you who have not yet submitted questions to us, please use the opportunity now to type in your questions into the chat box at any time. And last but not least, Jukka Tulivuori, Social Sector Specialist in ADB, will share with us his closing remarks. So with no further ado, I give the floor to His Excellency Juha Pikku, Ambassador of Finland to the Philippines.
Good afternoon, good morning, and thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen at the ADB, dear friends of education, I have the honor and pleasure to convey welcoming remarks at this webinar. At the outset, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the Asian Development Bank and its European Representative Office for putting together this event and developing and nurturing relations between Finland and the ADB in the field of education. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, Finland reopened her embassy in Manila on the 1st of September last year, and I arrived here early November. There were and there are three principal grounds for the reopening: facilitating business between Finland and the Philippines, strengthening the provision of immigration and consular services, and providing a more solid basis for foreign and security policy analysis in this geopolitically increasingly important region. One important factor in the sphere of business facilitation is the fact that the ADB is headquartered here in Manila. With and through our embassy here, we hope to be able to facilitate an even stronger relationship between Finland and the bank in furtherance of sustainable development in the region. Education, Finnish education expertise and excellence is part of the work of any Finnish embassy around the world, including here in Manila. On the bilateral level, we are in the process of initiating a dialogue in the field of education between the relevant authorities of Finland and the Philippines. In the same spirit, I'm happy to pay tribute to the important work of Ms. Leena Viljanen, as mentioned, our Finnish alternate executive director at the bank, as well as the whole constituency office, for promoting education as a crucial enabler of sustainable development. Furthermore, I'm proud of the important work of Mr. Jukka Tulivuori, our education sector specialist at the bank, bringing his profound expertise in the education field to the use of the bank in its operations. Ladies and gentlemen, as ambassador of Finland, it's always been a great pleasure to be able to spread the word about Finnish excellence in education. Here and now, before the more specialist interventions at this event, I will briefly touch upon a few broad topics in this respect. The success of the Finnish education model and philosophy is based on the realization since the 1960s of comprehensive schooling in Finland. This means that all Finns have equal access to free, high-quality education and training throughout their lives, regardless of social and financial background. No one is left behind. Holistic perspective on children's well-being is a key element, with the central aim of growing as a human being and as a citizen. We emphasize how to learn instead of what to learn. Focus is on learning and development rather than testing and monitoring. Curriculum implementation is left to be decided by the well-educated teacher. High-quality teacher education and training ensures high-quality education and training for children, youth, and adults alike in society at large. On these foundations, we strive to make education future-ready or future-proof. How? It is about technology, future skills, and equality. We strive to make use of the technological advances like artificial intelligence and digitalization in a sustainable way in education. What is important is good capacity for public sector collaboration, enterprise and research cooperation, and an evolving experimental culture. Obviously, all this has been increasingly important during the times of distance learning due to the COVID pandemic. Our experience in nurturing public-private partnerships, experimentation, and co-creation between the public school system and education technology entrepreneurs has been an important basis for this. Then, what kind of skills and competencies are needed in the future? We need to maintain and enhance the traditional basic skills such as reading and mathematics, but in addition, acquisition and management of information, critical thinking, creative problem solving, analytical decision making, business skills, and emotional, cooperative, and communication skills are considered even more important than before. All this has been in focus when reforming our vocational education and training system in the last few years. And finally, when future-proofing our education, we stay committed to fighting any growing inequality. The less skilled, less competitive individuals would become increasingly marginalized in the job market. We have to find very agile ways of reskilling large groups of people. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, with these words, I would like to once again thank the organizers of this event and wish us all a fruitful hour on education. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Pikku, and congratulations to the newly re-established Finnish embassy in Manila. And thank you for highlighting Finland's education experience. Our next speaker is Mr. Brajesh Pant, Chief of the Education Sector Group in ADB. Brajesh, over to you.
Thank you very much, Michiko. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone, particularly Honorable Ambassador, distinguished participants, wherever you may be. It's a great pleasure to join this webinar today. Next slide, please. ADB supports all levels of education, from early childhood through higher education, and in between school education, technical vocational education, and now increasingly there's demand for reskilling, upskilling the workforce. I will highlight the challenges and priorities in education in light of ADB's 2030 strategy and talk about the cooperation between ADB and Finland and then highlight ADB's portfolio. Next slide, please. ADB's developing member countries face mainly two challenges: slow progress on foundational learning despite remarkable progress in access and participation, and skills mismatches despite increasing levels of educational attainment. The graph on the left side of this slide shows that most of the people with low reading proficiency are in the Asia Pacific. The right side of the slide shows that the Asia Pacific has greater difficulty in filling vacancies. Next slide, please. Lessons learned and the impact of COVID-19 on the education, and we need to look at the lessons learned. So some lessons include: first, it revealed inherent inequities existing in the education systems, that the same students that were lagging behind are at a greater risk of lagging behind further due to inequitable access to internet and related support mechanisms. Multi-channel of learning is important depending on how low-tech, mid-tech, and high-tech situations work out. Second, digital contents and assessments are not readily available for effective distance learning at such a scale. Third, teachers are not prepared to manage distance learning. Fourth, the focus of learning shifted from school to home and to parents to support the children. This reinforces the importance of learning not only in school but outside of school, which is important to reduce inequities. Fifth, the EdTech solutions that were more confined to private education suddenly got much wider acceptance in public education, thereby underscoring the importance of public-private partnerships for such applications. Finally, it has become clear that distance learning and EdTech solutions are not made to replace face-to-face learning, but to complement through blended learning. Next slide, please. So what are the emerging trends? As I noted earlier, the main concern is that many students are not learning. According to World Bank's report on learning poverty, globally, over 50% 10-year-old cannot read simple story or do simple math. This is now called the learning crisis, and this needs to be addressed urgently since weak foundational skills will carry over at higher level and affect learners' ability to acquire higher level skills. What is important to rethink is that the same strategy that has helped to expand access may not work to improve learning, since improvements in learning require mindset change, deeper understanding about how children learn, strong support to teachers to become motivated instructional leaders, and ecosystem approach that ensures life cycle and whole of government approach. Next slide, please. Learning and equity are central to education reform. ADB projects generally include three components. First, quality and relevance to cover teacher quality, curriculum, assessment, and teaching and learning materials. Second, equitable access to education covers school construction, stipends and feeding programs, conditional cash transfers, and special provisions like teachers, female teachers, and also other kind of incentive support. And there are several examples where this has worked. And third, education management and governance to support financing, school management, and overall governance. More resources are needed, but better quality spending is equally important. Next slide, please. Finland is globally well known for its high quality, innovative education system, and the ambassador eloquently described the key features, and that is why we are all attracted to learn more about the Finnish education system. We want to look at, for example, this STEAM education being implemented by city of Turku. It is an example of what Mr. Ambassador highlighted: cooperation between public-private institutions, education, and also looking at the kind of skills that are required to develop from early stage to enhance the life choices of learners so that they become self-directed lifelong learners. Next slide, please. Now, the pandemic has accelerated the pace of digitalization, and education is not spared. It has been slow in terms of use of technology, but clearly there are promising signs, particularly from new generation adaptive learning. Here, I would like to emphasize the ecosystem approach required, again, to look at how technology can help. For example, we are talking about 5 pillars, which include government policies, digital infrastructure covering connectivity, devices, and digital materials, teachers and schools, parents and students to support home learning, and the role of public-private partnership in the provision of innovative EdTech solutions. We also take into account low, mid, and high-tech contexts to employ different solutions for the short, medium, and longer term. Next slide, please. This slide is to emphasize cross-sectoral collaboration, which is a major focus of ADB's Education Strategy 2030. Since education is the biggest enabler, its role is crucial to realize all sustainable development goals. Next slide, please. Now, talking about cooperation between ADB and Finland. ADB and Finland have a long history since Finland became one of the founding members of ADB in 1966. Finland has been a strong advocate of education investments in the region. Many of ADB's developing member countries are interested in Finland's experience in the development of education. Currently, some Finnish companies are involved in ADB's education projects, but more are, of course, welcome. And we're very happy to have UCA as part of our cooperation with Finland. Next slide, please. Now, let me look at ADB's operations. Education is one of the priority sectors in ADB's overall portfolio. Due to the pandemic, education lending decreased a little bit in 2020, while the overall lending increased substantially due to emergency support needed for health, social protection, and economic recovery. Overall, the target lending for the education sector is 6 to 10% by 2024. Next slide, please. This slide shows the lending trend in education by sector and region. Overall, the lending to education has continued to increase over time, and the lending pipeline looks quite robust. South Asia and Southeast Asia regions have the highest share of lending, while the Central West region is expected to grow in the next few years. Tibet has the highest share of lending, while higher education is growing. We expect the demand for school education to remain strong, particularly given the needs to universalize secondary education. Next slide, please. This slide provides examples of emerging innovative projects at all levels of education. Our developing member countries are looking for innovative approaches to improve learning and employability. Here are some examples. Digital and high-tech agriculture universities in Bangladesh, use of high technology in training, equipment, and international partnerships in India, skills for elderly care and early childhood education in the People's Republic of China, skills for health workforce in Vietnam, blended learning in higher education in again, Bangladesh and Indonesia, regional repository of ICT-based materials for education in the Pacific, and so on. Next slide, please. So the next 3 slides are basically a list of pipeline projects, and you can have a look at it later on to show what is coming up, what we are looking for, and then if you have any questions later on, please, you can always come back to us. The last slide, please. Yeah, this one. So this slide provides the key contacts in the education sector in ADB. So if you want to get into a specific project in a certain region, you can contact accordingly, and we'll be happy to clarify and provide you further details. So over. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brajesh, for your comprehensive presentation. And I hope that the Finnish firms that are with us today find it encouraging and will reach out to learn more about ongoing and future projects and to see whether there are areas that they would like to get involved in. It is now my pleasure and excitement to show you the surprise we have prepared. It's a preview of one of the videos we are working on with the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It is still a draft and not finished, and will be further finalized before it can be shared with the public. But we thought today is a good occasion and to give you the opportunity to already have a look.
Developing countries in Asia and the Pacific have come a long way in improving access to quality education. From having 2/3 of the world's out-of-school children in the 1970s, to having 9 out of 10 children overall in the region enrolled in primary school by 2018.
Despite the good access to education, challenges still remain, especially with learning outcomes. Also, COVID has been a major game changer, and it has shown us the importance of remote learning and teaching. The Asian Development Bank has been providing financial and advisory assistance to its developing member countries to tackle the key education challenges.
For more than 50 years, and with over $15 billion in loans and grants to the education sector, the Asian Development Bank is committed to assisting our developing member countries to achieve the goal of quality education for all. Since 1966, Finland has been supporting ADB's efforts to achieve a prosperous, inclusive, resilient and sustainable Asia and the Pacific, and has advocated for education investments in the region along with other member countries.
ADB is looking forward to a continued partnership with Finland and to contributing together to the education sector in Asia and the Pacific. ADB's European Representative Office is preparing a country engagement plan with Finland to strategically map out where we can most closely and most effectively work together to maximize our combined efforts in achieving the goals of ADB Strategy 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals.
I hope you enjoyed the little sneak preview, and you will look out for the final version. In fact, we are also working on another video focusing on the private sector and our partnership with Finland there. Okay, may I ask Mr. Jouni Kangasniemi, Program Director of Education Finland, to take the floor and share with us insights about Finland's education history, system, and services. Jouni, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michiko, and good morning, good afternoon, all the friends of education. Let's see my first slide. If you had one wish, what would it be? Mine would be like, it would be nice to be able to wake up every learner's curiosity to learn more throughout their lives. And the emphasis here is on learning, because if you can't remember anything else from my presentation, just I wish that you remember that we keep learning in the center of all our activities. People always ask, what can we learn from Finland? Next. Can Finnish education system copied so we could have more rapid improvement in our education system? Unfortunately not. But since learning is at the core of all our activities, we say that if you put different type of learners together, the learning will accelerate, and more and better learning will take place. Now I will walk through the Finnish history and point some of the important messages from the different time zones. Our education system was actually born just 150 years ago, when the Tsar Alexander II noticed that the Finns are low educated, agriculture society, and he was afraid that civil unrest will rise if something is not done. So he declared that education system should be established in Finland, a teacher seminar to be established so that we would have good quality teachers. And importantly, already at that time, he also declared that we should learn from other experiences and have some data from the existing situation and draw conclusions from that. And then have proper administration to decide on the next steps. So the key here was just to have access to education. And what we always know that there's always a lot of demands in the beginning, and the challenge is how to pick the winning formula. What are the key steps to take when education systems are developed? Next. It all began, but in 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution took place in our neighboring country, Russia, and that also opened the door for Finnish to become an independent country. But the good situation, the wise decision was made that the recovery from the Finnish Civil War included also operation in the field of education. Already just 2 years after the Civil War was ended, the decision makers decided that let's put all children into education and see that various groups are combined in the classes so that the children would learn how to live together and have a promising future. Next. And what was also noticed that change takes time, and already at that time, the decision makers noticed that let's give 16 years for this reform to take place. Next. Unfortunately, the war broke in Europe in 1939, and Finland was again drawn into the war. But as we know, education was already important even during the war. But what was noticed was that many of the kids came to school hungry. So there was a decision made that all children should be provided a free school meal, because if you're hungry, you will not learn. And the two other elements are, if you don't exercise, you don't learn. And the third element is that having enough sleep, you will learn much better. So school is not all about concentrating on content, but also many other things. Next slide. And how does the school meals look today? We still serve the school meals, and they have become part of the agenda. Even in the Finnish National Agency for Education, we recognize the importance of the proper meal and understanding the relevance of proper meals and all things around it. We also have established a National Nutrition Council that advises the whole population on proper eating models. And even in the neurosciences, educational sciences, we understand that even good nutrition and good food affects our ability to learn. Next slide. 50s, 60s, Finland saw a rapid expansion of education system because a lot of children were born to Finland. The age groups doubled up to more than 100,000 newborn babies every year. But since then, we have had a sharp decline in numbers of students entering to education. So the data tells us that first you needed to establish a lot of schools, but then also to see that what happens in the future when there's less and less children born in Finland. And the chart below describes the the number of small farms in Finland. It was rapidly decreasing the number, meaning that less and less people got employed in farm activities. So if the industrialization takes place, new knowledge is needed. So that meant also a lot of pressure for the education system to start training young people with new skills. And that also initiated a lot of research on education and around education. And what was noticed was that we had lots of talent lost because not everybody was included in good quality education. So that kind of like initiated the big reform in 1970s. Next. Where we decided that all children should be educated in the nearest school to them, and all would be provided the same opportunities. It's quite funny that this reform took place only in just 50 years ago, as the Chinese proverb says that the best time to act was 20 years ago, but if you did not act at that time, act now. Next slide. As I mentioned, in 1970s, when I went to school, the teaching looked like this. I was trying to memorize things, what teacher was teaching me, and this is the dominant model in many countries. But luckily, this all started to change. As we had these young eager learners coming to school and the reform taking place, we also educated teachers. We put teacher training to universities so that we would have even better quality teachers in Finland. Next slide. So actually, since mid-80s, 90s, throughout 2000 and so on, the Finnish education really started to shine. We could do some reforms that we're not able to do before, but once we had good well-trained teachers with us, we understand the structures behind education, we had research information to tell us what to do, we could do these changes. And in mid-90s, 95, we also established the first digital strategy in Finland. And for the past 25 years or so, the evolution has taken place. And the reforms still continue. Next slide. This is a slide where at that time, I was working with e-learning and digitalizing the education system a lot, and I tried to keep the things very simple. Already at that time, we noticed that first you need to train the teachers so that they are familiar with the equipment, and also the students. But soon we noticed that if the teachers do not collaborate, nothing will change, and it will be just very, very monotonous teaching. So we then emphasized the sharing of teachers' expertise. But that was not enough, because teachers wanted to do changes with the schools and with all the structures. So then we decided that let's put more emphasis on collaboration with the school level and at larger level, which let's include even the IT directors, the rectors, or content providers in the same discussions and see how that goes. And every school in Finland prepared a strategy for e-learning. And we are still on that path. And now it's becoming really collaborative, where we want to include the universities, the working places, the homes, the families with schools. So it really becomes collaborative. And especially during the COVID, we noticed how important this whole road has been. Next slide. In Finland, nowadays, we have lots of digital solutions in Finland, and many of the teachers are now they have become entrepreneurs by themselves when they have discovered new world in the digital world and new ways how to teach children. So we are more than happy to share these lessons with you also, what we have learned in digitalizing the education in Finland and how that's applied to support good quality learning. Next. So the teaching and learning looks like this. It's more individualized. It takes place in different arenas, not only in classrooms. The schools have become more like learning environment themselves, and the walls doesn't even hinder learning. Sometimes you need to go outside to learn even more. And we use different resources for different learners, so the teacher becomes like a coach for the learners, and the learners are also very clever in teaching other students. So it's not only one way from teacher to students, but the student themselves, and using outside expertise even, and that has become more easy than ever before. Next slide. I also want to emphasize the importance of research information for decision making. Once the Finnish schools went to closure last spring, we quickly organized the universities to do research and tell us what happens with these unusual times. And here I have just collected few findings, what was already evident at that time, and that has given us or fed us information where to focus when we get out from the COVID closure. We know that the homeschooling has demanded a lot from families. Not all parents are capable of supporting the learners. Not all families have the adequate equipment. There's less physical activities, less social activity between the students and outside world. So those are some of the key points where we'll focus with our exit strategy in the next months and years. Next slide. So we are happy to share all the lessons we have learned in Finland with you, not only in basic education. We have very lively vocational education, and our higher education system is also seen as one of the best in the world. So we are open for collaboration with our Asian and Pacific partners. Next slide. So here's just a quick look at Finnish education system, and as you can see, there are a lot of arrows in between the different layers of education. So the Finnish education is very flexible, and that means that we are very flexible with all our working methods. Thank you very much, and we are happy to keep in touch with you.
Thank you, Joni, for this great comprehensive presentation and history lesson in how Finland developed its education system, but also always how it adapts to the changing situation, was most recently the COVID situation. I do hope that our colleagues who are here today in ADB will further reach out to Education Finland to find out more details about the education services that have been honed over decades and that are available, and discuss with Education Finland how those could be integrated into ADB finance projects. Our next speaker is Mr. Kimo Koivisto, CEO of Digizen. Kimo will share with us the recent history of how Digizen and ADB came to work together. And with it, we hope that many of the Finnish companies that are attending today will find impetus and encouragement to seek opportunities with ADB. Kimo, over to you.
Thank you, Misika, and hello, everybody. So I'm going to talk from a point of view of a small Finnish company. How is it like to work with ADB? So I'm going to talk a bit how we got involved with ADB, an unusual route, how is it like working with ADB, what to consider when you're working on ADB project, and finally, I'm going to let you know what Digizen is actually doing. So all of this started in a hackathon organized in Manila. So we are a group of geeks who were, as a hobby, attending hackathons with a mission to find the next startup for ourselves to establish. So when we saw a crazy hackathon about digital ID in Manila, this was something we had to do. So we hopped on an airplane and started coding and developing our digital solution for digital identification. And there, of course, it helped that our team members have designed digital identification for 2 major banks in Finland, and we have been working in the Finnish National Registry digitalization. So we continued coding during the event and in hotel rooms almost everywhere where we could during that long weekend. Luckily, and after a very tedious hacking session, we did our final pitch in the ADB headquarters, and we were the lucky ones to be selected the winners of the Digital Identity Challenge organized by ADB. So this is how we got our foot into the door, and this helped us to what we learned later on to, how would I say, fast track few of the steps that usually would go through expression of interest, where we actually did the hackathon as the expression of interest, sort of to get familiar with ADB. Then the work with ADB is often their big adventures. So for us, ADB identified Papua New Guinea as the right country to pilot our solution. So it took us there, and we've been able to develop the digital identification for people who don't have any identity documentation at all, in close collaboration with the people in the villages in Papua New Guinea. So here you see a little bit of video footage on our concept testing that we performed in Papua New Guinea. But because Papua New Guinea is a very extraordinary country, we got some nice surprises as well. So for example, in one village that we entered, there was, how would I say, very overwhelmingly nice reception where several villages had gathered to celebrate and organize a big party for our arrival, where we were treated as rock stars. It was something to remember. So to tell you a bit more how work with ADB works, we have been working in several stages where we have completed now stages 1, 2, and 3, where the first one was about defining the concept, where we traveled a couple of times to Manila to work with ADB and to identify partners we can work with, private banks in Papua New Guinea. Then in stage 2, it was more about validation, where we went to Papua New Guinea to meet other stakeholders, such as the Bank of Papua New Guinea, representing the government of PNG. Then we moved on to development stage, where we developed a prototype of our solution and started trialing it with about 100 users in Papua New Guinea. And now we are actually yesterday we received a draft contract with ADB for a pilot with 20,000 users to be organized in Papua New Guinea. So here are a couple of things that I'd like to let you know about working with ADB. It's very rewarding, as all ADB officials that we have been working with have been very talented and very professional, and they are like great collaboration partners. Also, ADB business is very secure, that whenever you have a contract, you can trust that ADB honors what has been agreed in the contract, and the payments will come to your company. However, there might be a long delay between contracts, which is important to take into consideration, so that your company can adapt to those periods when there's no collaboration necessarily that much with ADB. Also, it's all about access. That you might wonder, how can a small startup from Finland work with the government of Papua New Guinea? And I think that's all thanks to ADB, as they bring in the credibility to us. And that has made it possible for us to work in fly-in, fly-out mode, meaning that we can operate from Finland instead of relocating directly to Papua New Guinea. And ADB has given us much more than money. Like mentioned, they are brokering the relationship with the PNG government and banks and giving us a lot of expert help. So for example, like mentioned, ADB helps the broker and gives the credibility, but they demand a lot. For example, in terms of technology, the requirements are really high, as they have, for example, contracted PricewaterhouseCoopers to perform cybersecurity audit on our technology. And they have also contracted a small consulting company called TRPC from Singapore to support us defining data governance and how data is handled in our system. So that kind of tells that as a small startup, you would probably not be able to afford to such high quality cybersecurity audits, but ADB has provided that audit and also the requirement for our technology to meet that audit requirements. Then obviously one interesting part is the ticket to adventure, that with all ADB officials, when we talk about their projects, they are, at least for us looking from Finland, very adventurous places and very nice projects where they're really helping people on the ground. So definitely something to consider, to me, a bonus working with ADB. Then let's move on to tell you a bit what we are doing actually at Digizen. So we are creating digital identification for people who don't have any identification. So here's Romson, a vanilla farmer we met in Maprik in Papua New Guinea. And Romson and his children there don't have any identification documentation. And that means that they are excluded from basic services that we take for granted. But if Romson would like to get an identification document, he would need to collect way too many documents, and that's impossible task for people like Romson who don't have any documentation. And that's the reason why there's over 1 billion people in the world without identity documents. So we at Digizen, we changed that so that instead of Romson being responsible collecting proof who he is, we use our partner agents to visit villages and onboard people. So there they collect identity information with mobile devices. So they take photos of the people, they capture fingerprints, name, date of birth, and so on. And they also gather evidence and validate those identities. In Papua New Guinea regulation, the ward councillors can sign off people's identities and confirm their details. So now we can instantly issue the digital identification card in the jungle without internet, and that can be used then for different services, such as opening up a bank account. So we at Digizen, we changed the impossible task of getting ID to an easy thing to do for people like Romson. We reduce the time that it takes traditionally months to get an ID documentation to actually minutes to collect information, verify information, and issue the documentation. And that helps us to radically lower the cost of verified identity. But in identity, we see it as a critical enabler for many services, such as getting access to banking. But we have, during this ADB Finance project, we have built a digital signature and trust platform where our vision is to start creating different services on top of identity and verified information, where, for example, relevant to education sector is, for example, study diplomas and qualifications, where we can always verify the authenticity of the information, so that whenever you reach a diploma, we can make sure that it is genuine and authentic diploma, and that can be confirmed also offline without internet connectivity. So that is my short presentation about working with ADB and what Digizen does, and I'm very happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimo. That was really interesting. And I think it'll be interesting to continue our dialogue to see how your technology can be applied in other areas, including the education sector. And we had also discussed the health sector. As a quick feedback to your presentation, I would like to highlight to everyone here that we see more and more opportunities in hackathons, and ADB is organizing quite a lot of hackathons, which can be, as it was for Digizen, an entry to work with ADB. So the European Representative Office of ADB will be working closely with Finland's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Education Finland to make sure that any upcoming hackathons will be shared with you. Okay, I know I'm very wary of time, and I swiftly move to the Q&A session. And I saw several questions come in, and let me ask the first question to Brajesh. Brajesh, the question is, how can technology enable teacher training for low literate, remote, disadvantaged, and rural education centers, especially in developing countries?
Actually, that's a very good question, and this is exactly what is coming up as a big impact of COVID. So there are different ways of looking at it. One is basically pairing more prepared teachers in urban centers with rural areas, because the good experience can be shared that way. If the technology situation is still rudimentary in rural areas, then it is important to rely on other means. For example, social media type of using mobile apps, which may facilitate to begin with, and then looking at promoting questioning techniques that will help students to get stimulated. There is also, as part of the learning impact on learning losses, assessment is another area. How to assess how students are learning. So simple techniques would be very important, including even print materials to support. Then I think it is also important to look at teacher training in terms of managing distance learning. It includes mental sort of challenges, because children thrive with interactions, and many are now losing patience. We hear a lot of stories. So how to keep them motivated, I think, is very important. So there are different ways, but not easy, given the barriers to connectivity and so on.
Thank you, Brajesh. Actually, Joni, would you like to add to that from Finland's recent experience digitalizing during COVID?
I can only say that it's a learning curve for us as well, for the teachers, for the parents, for the children, and even for the administration. But I mean, since we started rather early, I mean, it has given us some advantage on it, but it's a very important mission that what we are on, and it opens very exciting avenues in the future.
Good, thank you, Joni. We have another question from the floor, and this one is in response to Joni's presentation. Whether you could provide background information on the policy for increasing the number of years for compulsory education and what compulsory education covers.
Yes, we are actually rising the bar at the moment, so there will be more information about that as soon as we have all the necessary decision making done, and then translating the materials. Sometimes the language is a small barrier, but luckily we can produce more materials also in other languages. We are more than happy to do so. So far, we are increasing the years for compulsory education up to 18, meaning that basic education and secondary education are compulsory. And also, I mean, we try to raise the whole level of population so that 50% would also get the higher education degree in Finland.
Okay, thank you, Joni. The next question we had received earlier, and Brajesh, may I pose it to you? The question is, what type of competences and services does ADB anticipate needing for its education sector work, especially from Finnish and/or Nordic firms?
I want to go back to what was presented by Uni and also what the ambassador, Mr. Ambassador, sort of highlighted. The core is teachers. So how to prepare good teachers, over time, and there are implications for short term and long term. So what can be done during the short term, but in the long term, how to strengthen universities and the support system to prepare teachers. Similarly, Finland is very well known for integrated approach to learning. How do you do that, in a way that students are engaged and can learn from everyday experience? So some of the pedagogical models that help to bring out that practice. The third area I would say is how to improve assessment. So I'm not talking about a terminal, summative assessment, but formative assessment, so that it gives confidence to students and they sort of then begin to learn at a faster pace. So these are the core areas which will be very important. And I think areas like STEAM education to connect across the education sector and bringing, the life cycle and whole of government components. I think that's the kind of area that would really help our developing member countries.
Thank you, Brajesh. Actually, there are many more questions, but we are running out of time. Just to let you know, we will have another virtual coffee in September, where Finnish companies can ask more questions on specifically how to get involved with ADB. And I think there will then also be many questions for Kimo and his experiences again. I'm sorry that we are running out of time. And with this, I'd like to hand over to Jukka Tulivuori to give us his closing remarks. Jukka?
Thank you, Michiko. His Excellency, Mr. Ambassador, participants of this webinar, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that all you have well done through this webinar today. I also hope that you have enjoyed the presentations and all the information we have got as much as I did. As we can clearly see, actually, ADB and Finland are sharing the same vision to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal number 4, education for all. I think this really is something that we can clearly work on and achieve together. I hope that every participant in this webinar today can maybe think about different ways that how can we do more cooperation in the area of education between Finland and Asian Development Bank. I would also like to use this opportunity to thank everyone who made this webinar to happen today, especially all the presenters today, and of course Michiko, who carried the main responsibility, and then all the colleagues in the ERO office, as well as colleagues in the headquarters in Manila. Thank you so much. ADB is doing a lot in the education sector. As Brajesh mentioned, we are trying to raise the percentage of education sector lending in the future. And then we can also see that there are a lot of opportunities for Finland and Finnish companies and Finnish experts to be more engaged in the work of ADB. So I would actually like to say that this webinar is not the end, but this is the start. And as Michiko also mentioned, there are some more events coming up this year between ADB and Education Finland and organized together with the European Office of ADB. So please follow up your emails closely and join our future events as well. And as mentioned, the next one will be in September. Thank you once more joining us today, and have a good morning, day or evening, wherever you are. Thank you once more.